the administration's negotiations with Iran failed to achieve an interim agreement this past weekend. And if published reports are accurate, we owe our French allies a great deal of credit for preventing the major powers in the negotiations, the so-called P5+1, from making a bad interim deal with Iran, a deal that could have allowed Iran to continue making progress on key aspects of its nuclear program, and in return, they would receive an easing of billions of dollars in sanctions. The Senator from South Carolina and I are not opposed to seeking an interim agreement with Iran as a way to create better conditions for negotiations on a final agreement. We joined with some of our colleagues on a letter to the President in support of such an approach before the Geneva Agreement. But our support was conditioned on the need for any interim agreement to be based on the principle of suspension for suspension. That is to say, the Iranians would have to fully suspend their enrichment of uranium and their development of their weaponization programs and infrastructure, including construction of the heavy water reactor at Arak. The idea would be to freeze Iran's nuclear program in place so that negotiations could proceed on how to roll it back without the threat that the Iranians could use negotiations as a delaying tactic. And I remind my colleagues, they have done that time after time. In fact, the new president of Iran, Mr. Rouhani, bragged when he was negotiator that they were able to fool the negotiators and increase the centrifuges from 150 to 1,000. We've seen the movie before. If Iran agreed, though, to this freeze, we would support, Senator Graham and I said we would support suspension of our efforts to pass and implement new sanctions. Unfortunately, public reports suggest that the administration was willing to agree in Geneva to less than a full suspension of Iran's program and to pay for that inadequate step with billions of dollars in sanctions relief. This is not a, quote, suspension for suspension, regardless of administration claims to the contrary, and that is a problem. It puts too much trust in President Rouhani, the one who I talked about before, who bragged about deceiving the international community when he was Iran's nuclear negotiator. In fact, the current diplomatic efforts are consistent with a pattern of past deals undertaken by the Iranian government to buy breathing space and shift international expectations in order to continue development of its nuclear program. We have to avoid an interim agreement that diminishes Iran's incentive to make the hard decisions that we ultimately need them to make as part of a final agreement, and that final agreement must require Iran to do the following: comply with all outstanding UN Security Council resolutions, sign, ratify, and implement the additional protocol of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, address outstanding concerns of the IAEA, especially through expanding inspection measures, halt construction on and ultimately dismantle the Arak heavy water reactor, stop development of advanced centrifuges, and turn its supply of enriched material over to the IAEA. A final agreement should also not recognize that Iran has any inherent right to enrich. A country that has continuously been on the path for nuclear weapons, who has violated protocol after protocol, should not have the, quote, right to enrich. And without these measures, Iran's nuclear program will continue to grow, and as the program grows, it will be harder to track and harder to set back. And only when Iran seriously undertakes measures to dismantle its nuclear program should sanctions be unwound. The administration should not weaken the strong negotiating position that Congress has helped to create. Instead, it should use this position to its advantage. And before I ask my friend from South Carolina to comment, let's not forget the context of Iran and negotiations with Iran. This is an arms control issue, the nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, we seem to ignore the fact that Iran is spreading terror throughout the Middle East and would like to throughout the world. It is the Iranians that have armed and trained and equipped 5,000 Hezbollah that are slaughtering people in Syria. It is Iran that sends the Iranian Revolutionary Guard into Syria and slaughters people. It is Iran that is supporting the Islamic extremist groups that are now moving seriously on the side of Bashar Assad into Syria. It is Iran that is spreading terror throughout the Middle East and would attempt to throughout the world. They still view the United States of America as the great Satan. They are still committed to, quote, wiping Israel off the map. Iran is a threat to peace in the world, and it's not only the issue of nuclear weaponry. It is their entire behavior of spreading terrorism throughout the region, propping up Bashar Assad while he continues to slaughter, maim, rape, torture, and kill. And for this administration and this Secretary of State to ignore those facts about Iran, in my view, is a disgraceful conduct. And I would finally add, before I turn to my friend from South Carolina, the United States' influence and power throughout the world, especially in the Middle East, is no longer there. Every Middle East leader that I talk to, everyone I know in the region, say that they believe the United States is leaving, the United States is not in any way involved, and they are making accommodation for the absence of United States leadership. This president does not believe in American exceptionalism. America must lead, or Iran, Russia, and other countries will lead, and sooner or later, the United States will pay a very, very heavy price. We must not ignore the lessons of history. We've several times in our history tried to withdraw to Fortress America, and every time we've paid a very heavy price. So I would ask my friend from South Carolina, it's important, this Iranian issue. It is of transcendent importance, but I do not believe that it can be viewed in a vacuum, considering Iran's continued effort to try to undermine and destroy everything that America, freedom and democracy, that we stand for.
Well,